good evening to everybody. Welcome again, my brothers and sisters here in Orange Beach. Thank you for those of you that moved a little further forward. A little tiny crowd here today, but again, welcome to all of you online. And I guess there's a camera there and one here and one up here and one behind, so hide that one. But we're welcome to everyone here and our special guests that have transferred in. My wife and I were in Tucson. What year was that, Gail? We stayed with some good friends who's now both are deceased. And you would know who they are. But we stayed with them and went to that graveyard. Was that Boot City? What was the name of that graveyard? I forget now. But yeah, Boot Hill. Here lies Joe, shot with a 44, 4 shots, not 3, no less, no more, or whatever it was. But anyway. Welcome to God's Feast of Tabernacles. As we say down here in Orange Beach or on the Gulf Coast, welcome y'all. Not welcome y'all, but welcome y'all. And there's a difference between y'all and y'all. But you all will know that as we go through the feast. My wife and I are privileged again. This is cutting in and out again like last year, Gail. So we may need to switch over. I can turn it. But to be with you as our family. For years, my wife and I, most all of our feasts have been outside of the United States. But once again, we're here. It's a blessing. I live 28-point-something miles to the north, which is, with the traffic, a long, hard drive to get down here. Well, if you don't stop at Buc-ee's, it's a little faster. But we live right up that way. Any of you, after you've been here for the feast, enjoy it and say, we'd like to come back and visit, you're welcome. You can use our home. If we're not there, we'll give you the code and the key. But you're welcome to stay there. And it's considerably cheaper than what it costs to rent these during the prime season, which you can pay up to $1,000 a night for some of these jewels. But we'll just charge you, I don't know, a cleaning fee, maybe 50 cents a day, something like that. So you're welcome. We'd love to have you. Hope you find this building and location enjoyable. If someone says they couldn't find where it was, you couldn't see the sign out front, then we need to set up an eye doctor appointment. But let's cherish this time together, and may the God of peace live among us these days as we fellowship with Him and each other. We are here together, as we read in the announcements, to rejoice in the fear of the eternal, of the Lord. And as we examine these scriptures, we're going to see how observing God's Feast of Tabernacles really does unlock God's plan of salvation as we concentrate for 8 days on His will, His Word, and what's in store for us as His children. I don't know about you, but in the last 3 to 4 years, somebody dumped our groceries out in aisle 6 of Walmart when it comes to what the world was supposed to be like. And it just changed. And I think over the years, and I think I first talked about this subject on the opening night back in 2005, may have been in Guatemala. I want to expand on it and do so again because it's so vitally important to understand why we're here in Orange Beach observing the feast, God's feast. So we've talked about this before. This is not my first time because we have many more connected this year and in attendance. I felt it important to discuss this message again. And we can hear the sound table. Just be aware of that so I can hear you. Remember that if you would. I remember years ago we had a man that some of you may know, so I definitely won't even hint where he lives or what his name is, but he had a booming voice. He'd come back to the sound table, "Hey, need more volume!" I'd like, everybody can hear you. So anyway, we can. As long as you can hear me, we're okay too. These videos, these messages will be recorded. I definitely want, with permission for copyright, that blowing of the shofar. I would like that a separate sound bite and video to put on the Feast of Tabernacles. We'll have to see how much he's going to charge us for those royalties, but definitely enjoyed that. And I think most of you here are aware that you and I, and those of you watching, we're not the only people to keep the fall holy days. We used to teach years ago we were the only ones. Nobody else did, but we're not. The Jews also keep these days. In fact, they're the largest body of people who do. But their approach is somewhat different than ours. They approach the fall holy days, especially the Day of Atonement, much of the same way that you and I approach the Passover, with repentance, self-examination, and humility. From the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, it says the Day of Atonement marked the turning point of the year, primarily perhaps in the natural phenomena of Palestine, but at the inner life of the nation and individual. The religious significance of these days is days of judgment, penitence, and forgiveness soon overshadowed any other significance they may have had. So turn with me, if you would, as we begin, Leviticus 23. That would be in the Old Testament. Recently I had someone write me and said, "You keep reading from these books I've never heard of." And I said, "Well, they're in the Old Testament." And they wrote back, "Well, do you use that?" I said, "Absolutely." So Leviticus 23, verse 39. In the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the fruit of the land, you shall keep a feast unto the Lord 7 days. I'm big on numbers because God's big on numbers. And He points it out and He mentions it over and over. And yet people like to monkey with numbers. So you shall keep a feast unto the Lord 7 days. On the first day shall be a Sabbath, and on the 8th day shall be a Sabbath. And you shall take on the first day the boughs of goodly trees, branches of palm trees, the boughs of thick trees, willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. Okay? The ancient Israelites were commanded to build booths to live in how many days? 7 days during the feast. And in my Friday night pastor's letter a few weeks ago, I talked about booths, a temporary dwelling that they offer. And what we learn about the Feast of Tabernacles and booths, one of the things is it is very temporary. Those of us that live on the Gulf Coast realize all of our homes are temporary. We only need one good tropical storm or hurricane, and we really realize how temporary it is. And unfortunately, some of us go through that. There is a huge lesson in doing this, building this booth or sukkot, much more than might meet us right at the eye when we look at it. Because the Jews interpreted, again, I've talked about this before, the Jews interpreted this building of a booth as a separate ceremony. They take the branches and then they carefully weave all those branches together. And to them, each tree, each branch represents only a part of the feast. But you put all the branches and they're woven together, you know what they represent? God being with them everywhere during the feast. We often have talked about one of the attributes of God is that He is omnipresent. That's a whole other separate message because I believe God chooses to not be omnipresent many times. What do I mean by that? Well, He can be everywhere at once if He wants to be, but if that's the case, why do the angels have to go tell Him, hey, look what's going on down in Sodom and Gomorrah? And when all the angels came to talk to Him, remember He said to one of them, came amongst them, have you remembered, you considered my servant Job? So I believe at times we have extrapolated things. I'm not saying God can't be. But to the Jews, God is the feast. I'll explain that in more detail in the next few minutes. If you would like a title for this message, For those of you that like titles, and I know some of you do, that's why I put them on the website. Tonight, if you go on at about 11 o'clock, you will find out what the title for tomorrow's message is going to be. And if you went on today, you would see what tonight is. Maybe that's why there's so many people not here yet. Maybe not. But to the Jews, God is the feast. And the title is, He is here. He being the Lord, the Eternal One. He is here. Years ago, I heard a minister give a message where he said, well, God's here, yes, but he said, thankfully Satan isn't, and his demons. And I thought, dude, you haven't kept very many feasts. Because we can ask God to stay that and keep him away, but believe me, God is here. And if we remember that and we draw near to him, we don't need to worry about the other, do we? In Ezekiel chapter 48 and verse 35, let's go there, please. Ezekiel chapter 48, verse 35. Here it's interesting. It's talking, I find it fascinating. Here talking about the city. It says, it was round about 18,000 measures, 18,000 cubits. How big is a cubit? Anybody remember? Cubit. Huh? About 3 feet or foot and a half? 18 inches. So 18,000 cubits. And the name of the city from that day shall be what? Right? I believe the Hebrew would be the YHVH and then Shammah, which is translated, God's presence is here, the Lord is there. Okay, the Lord is there. And the New Jerusalem, the name and the description of the city inscribed in the walls is, the Lord is here. His God's presence will be known. He will be known among men and be their God. And it's an exciting time to look forward to. And we have a foretaste right now, starting with this opening night of the feast, which is Tishri 15, here in Orange Beach, and many other places around the globe. So what better theme or vision in our minds can we have as we keep and observe and fellowship, both in messages, singing, praying, dancing, which we're going to have some Hebrew dancing or Hebraic dancing being taught. I'll have to not be part of that this time, but I can watch. And so we'll be part of that. We'll have fellowship when we eat, in our condominiums, our hotels, for camping, whatever we're doing. I look out over this group, and I know we also have on the webcast, I know how many people, and based on the last few years, how many people are connected will be watching this, and will watch it again multiple times. I want to ask the question, and I like to do this every so often, of how many feasts has this been for some of you? And this is not a competition thing. It's just curious because as we keep getting older, the number keeps getting larger. Let me ask, how many of this is your, say, 5th feast? 10? Well, just you can hold them up and see how long you can hold your hands up. 15? Okay, 20? 30? Okay, 40? 50? 55? 60? Okay, 60? Okay, 60? I got 60. A little bit of time. It's not a competition, but what it tells me is this. Every year I look at the feast, I'm reminded I'm 1 year closer to the return of Christ when this becomes a reality. And I can only think what it's going to be like with the absence during most of that millennial time of Satan's presence and his demons. And we can say, God is here. Now, many of you remember what it was like before God became part of your life, in the sense of you understood who He is. It was very different. When one day you're like, whoa, right? And even if you grew up in this, there's some point in your life where all of a sudden you go, wow, God, like Job, now I see you. Now I get it. You're here. It's pretty cool. Maybe it's the first time you thought about it, but I want you to stay with me is let's examine what God wants us to see very clearly. Deuteronomy 16:16. In Deuteronomy 16:16, it says three times in a year shall all the males appear before the Lord your God in the place which He shall choose in the spring, feast of unleavened bread, in the Feast of Weeks, summer, if you will, and the Feast of Tabernacles in the autumn, and they shall not appear before the Lord empty. God says, don't forget these holy days, my feast days, but we go where God says God is there and has placed His name. He's placed His name here in Orange Beach. We're not the only people here that are keeping the Feast of Tabernacles. In fact, if you would like, I can show you and connect you with if you want to keep part of a day for the Feast of Tabernacles with a different part of the body, you can probably go to 3 different places every day and not make it to all of them by the time the 8 days are over, if that's what you want to do. But God has placed His name, scattered that at places. And in many messages I talk about this. I will ask questions about how much are you and I focused on the vision of God's kingdom. So I want to ask more specifically, how much are you focused on the literal presence of God? I'm diabetic. My blood sugar goes up and down like the wind, even with medication. To this afternoon, I became extremely hungry for a very large meal. And people look at you funny, like, what's the problem? Just have a snack with us. We're fine. I'm not. And when I get really sick, I have to be reminded to say, God lives in me. And I realize that if I don't eat something in about an hour, I'm going to go to the hospital. Now, if you've never been diabetic, you don't understand that. You think, come on. But what I realize is that God is in me, and many times I've said, God, I know you're here. I know you're here. Help me through this. And so when we worship at the feast, and we're thinking about, man, I wish this guy would get done. I want to go home and have a gin and tonic or a glass of wine. I want to go home and rest. I'm tired. I'm tired too. But you know what? There's no better place that we could be as we open the services than to be where God is. And He's here, and He's with us, and He's in the midst of us. One of the lessons we should learn from the feast is the ability to see God. Not just through our lens of what we see, this is what God is like, but what God wants us to see God is like and that He's here. And that's individual for each person. And one of the things we try to do is project what we think is what God is like, what He looks like, how He speaks, right? It was so easy to pick Christ out in His day, wasn't it? You knew exactly what He looked like. Not. No. And if I were to look out, I know all of you here. And I'll get to know you. So after the feast, it's over. But I know all of you. Most of you. But if this was a huge crowd, like the concert you guys came down through when you came here, won't mention the guy's name because it's not worth mentioning, but if you went to his concert and you looked out over that and said, okay, Where's Kathy Morelli Myers? Where is she? And I didn't know you? I'd be like, no clue. So you read about Jesus Christ. How did you know who He was? You didn't by looking at Him. Okay? And so if you have in your mind what He looks like, what He acts like, what He talks like, I've said this before, if He came back to the church today, I don't think He'd be welcome in a lot of places. He wouldn't dress right. Maybe a little bit of sarcasm, maybe humor, maybe his hair went over his ears, right? Whatever you want to pick. Maybe He wouldn't use the right pronunciation of whatever. Maybe He wouldn't say Genesis. Maybe He would say something else. Maybe He would be late. 5 minutes late for church. Then what would you do? Right? Maybe He wouldn't wash His hands before He ate the lunch. Maybe He wouldn't sit at the head table that said minister only. I'm sorry, I need to stop. Okay, so. The ability to see God. The 4 arboreal branches, some commentaries say 4, some say 5, were not designed for the construction of booths, but were to be carried in the temple to rejoice before the Lord 7 days. They had a different purpose than what everybody thinks. Apparently, during the feast, the Jews would bring their branches to the tabernacle, and Brad, you can help me out here, and they'd walk around it in the altar every day. And you may think, why would they do that? Anybody have an idea? By the way, if you say something in response to my question, you will not be asked to leave. You can do that here. If you really don't have a clue, what did you just say? Can you repeat that? I don't get it. Feel free. You will not be thrown out of here. I might have somebody else answer the question, but. So they'd walk around the altar every day, and it was to show that God is there every day and was therefore involved in everything that was done that they were doing during the feast. So if you're sitting in your chair right now thinking, I can't wait till the next Alabama game, and you're not listening, that's your choice. By the way, they have a football team here. I don't watch them, but I hear they have one. And what are our thoughts on when we're at the feast? What do we think about? Do we think about, the light don't work in the bathroom, the toilet paper thing's busted, seriously, I thought we were going to have like prime rib sandwiches and all we got is this other food. If you start thinking about all these things, ask yourself, are you thinking about that God is here in our midst, with us and in us? He was present, and all that was done to His glory and His honor. To them, each tree, each branch was important. How about you? How are you going to observe and keep His feast this year? I hope it's different for you. I hope it's different. One of the blessings of being a small feast site is that when you have the meals and the fellowship, you kind of don't get lost unless you go walk in the corner and stare through the screen and ignore everybody. There isn't very many places to go hide. Big groups, you can act like you're doing something and people can all leave and you can get by probably a whole day without talking to somebody. Some people like to do that. As we have a few activities in fellowship, worship service, interaction, what about God being here in the midst of us? Have you thought about that? That He's here. Now you might think, okay, I'm not sitting here. I'm online, here in my condo at the small gathering. There's 10 of us over here in Panama City, sitting alone at home. It doesn't mean me. Actually, it does mean you. It means all of us. And one of the things the body of Christ, I believe, has kind of forgotten a little bit is the purpose for the feast, and that God is here. God is here. In Exodus 3:14, let's go there quickly. Exodus 3:14. Exodus chapter 3, if I can get there. Okay, Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. You know the story. Moses came up to the burning bush. That had to just blow his mind to see this thing popping and sizzling, smoking and burning, but not being burnt up. And it did. And you know the story. He said, take off your shoes, your sandals, for the place you stand is holy ground. And as you read through it, you get down verse 13. And Moses said unto God, behold, when I come unto the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, the God of your fathers has sent me unto you, and they shall say to me, oh yeah? What's his name? Okay? What's his name? What do I say to him? Now think about that. Think about the question of what's going on and the relationship. And he's asking him, okay, so I tell him, blah, 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 the God of your fathers sent me to you, and they'll say, what's his name? God, what do I say to him? And God said unto Moses, I don't care, make up a name. No. I am that I am. Okay? The Hebrew word is hayah. I am that I am. And he said, you shall say unto the children of Israel, I am has sent me unto you. Now, I gave a message years ago on the 7 I ams. You go through, I am the door, I am the chief shepherd, I am the life, I am the way. The word hayah, interestingly enough, is the same. I don't use Strong's Concordance a lot, but I like this one because it's 1961. That's when I was born. To become, occur, come to pass, be. The verb indicates more than a simple existence of identity. That could be indicated by omitting the verb altogether. The verb makes a strong statement about being the very literal presence of something. The simple meaning become or come to pass appears in English versions. One of the most debated uses of hayah or hayah occurs in Exodus 3:14, where God tells Moses his name. He says, hayah, hayah. I am that I am. And the divine name, many pronounce it various different ways, Jehovah, Yahweh, well known long before. And again, and I've done a lot of research on this, I'll be talking about this in the future. There are no vowels. There's books where they've said there are. Exactly how we pronounce this very subjective. It's why I say eternal, and I don't try to get too detailed. If some do, that's their choice, and I respect it. But the revelation emphasizes that God who made the covenant was the God who kept the covenant. He made it, and He kept it. So it's more than just a simple statement of identity. I am that I am. It's a declaration of divine control of everything. That's from Vine's Expository Dictionary that adds some of that emphasis. In Exodus chapter 14, let's go there. Exodus chapter 14. Verse 10. When Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. Can you hear that? Boom, 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 boom. Would that not shake you up, hearing that, watching them come like a swarm? And they were sore afraid. Best explanation of that is the little thrigs, the three little pigs, right? Huff and I'll pluff and the puff. The three little pigs were sore afraid. They were flat scared to death. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. They never did that unless they realized they were in trouble and they needed help. They were afraid. Verse 11. And they said unto Moses, Because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us out here to die in this wilderness? That'd make a good song on hee-haw. Wherefore have you dealt with us to carry us forth out of Egypt? You did it. You brought us out. Is not this the word that we did tell you in Egypt, saying, let us alone, for we may serve the Egyptians? It had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than we might die in the wilderness. They'd just been through the Passover. They'd witnessed some dramatic things. But they got to verse 11. What's missing? What's missing in verse 11? The elements that's missing is God. They could see God in the miracles, the dramatic miracles, but they couldn't see Him without the miracles. And my question is for us as we keep the feast, can we see God as being here? Or does He have to do something for us individually to where we see Him? Verse 29. Let's go on. Verse 29. The children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall unto them. So it was not just the Reed Sea, as I heard a sermonette they call them one time, that they tiptoed through the Reed Sea. There was no miracle. Well, it says, if there was a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. I see a wall here, I see a wall here. Is that over our heads? Can you hop over that? You're confined in here unless you go out a door or a window. So they had this wall. And they said, thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. And Israel saw that great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord, and they believed the Lord and His servant Moses. And my translation adds, because I added it, for a little while. Okay? And so when God does something dramatically in our life, all of a sudden we believe Him. Heals us, blesses us financially, whatever He does. He had delivered them. They had no doubt of His presence, but the difficulties they faced in taking the entire nation out on foot seemed insignificant as long as God was with them. Let's move to chapter 15. Chapter 15, verse 22. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out in the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness. Again, God says 3 days. And they found no water. Is that a problem for any of you? 3 days no water? 3 days no shower? 3 days no drinky? Right? 3 days no water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink of it, the waters, for they were bitter. It wasn't drinkable. Therefore, the name of it was called Marah. Duh. Okay, so we know what it's called, Marah. And the people said, not a problem, God will provide. No, the people murmured against Moses, saying, there's nothing to drink. Right? There's nothing to drink. So 3 short days later, they forgot what God did at the Red Sea. I don't think so. I don't think they could have, in 3 days. I mean, my mind sometimes, I don't remember what I did yesterday, but let me see. This is Sunday night. Saturday, Friday, we were frantically trying to pack to get down to check into the condos. That was Friday. Frantically, we were just packing. So I remembered, it took a little bit to think, but the miracle of the Red Sea, the dramaticness of it, or what happened, did they forget? I don't think so. What they couldn't do, though, is to see God without some big ta-da! Like the one song, Jesus, take the wheel, right? He's got to take the steering wheel. Otherwise, right? And there has to be something huge for us to see God. They couldn't see Him without it. Chapter 16, verse 13. This story is hilarious. It came to pass that at even, or sunset, the quails came up and covered the camp. In the morning the dew lay around about the host. And when the dew that lay was gone, behold, upon the face of the wilderness there lay a small round thing, as small as a tiny bit of crystallized water covering the ground on the ground. And when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" Right? What is it? For they didn't know what it was. And Moses said, "This is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat." There couldn't have been any Italians there, right, Kathy? Because they would have said, "That's not bread." But here again, another challenge. They didn't have enough to eat. They didn't have enough to eat. So once again, they said, "No problem. God will provide." No, they murmured, so God provided manna. And with the manna, there it is. Once again, they could see God. Though some were blind enough to lose sight of Him when it came to not keeping any overnight, and apparently many lost sight of Him. But what happened at the end of the week when they were supposed to gather a double portion? On to chapter 16. Let's read for a moment in Numbers chapter 11. Let's go over to Numbers. In Numbers chapter 11, and verse 4, we know the story. Numbers chapter 11, verse 4 to 6. And he called the name of the place Taberah, which means God's wrath, a burning of it, because the fire of the Lord burnt among them, and the mixed multitudes among them fell a-lusting, and the children of Israel wept again. They began to complain and said, "Who shall give us flesh to eat? We remember the fish." Oh, the mangrove snappers, right? The redfish, which we ate in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. But now our soul is dried away. There's nothing besides the stinking manna before our eyes. And it did stink, some of it. Manna, the daily miracle from God, wasn't enough. They had to have another Red Sea. Over the years, I've told people, in talking with them and trying to encourage them, if you always have to have a Red Sea miracle to believe that God is here and with you, you're going to have a difficult time. There's a very human tendency that you and I can relate to. We all want evidence that God likes and loves us, right? We want to know that. If we're normal, we want to see the hand of God at work. But many times we're looking for a Red Sea miracle rather than looking for the little things that God does for us daily. Like last night, Eric, when the Domino's delivery guy passed us on the right side, doing at least 45 miles an hour faster than us, swerved, and then took a right turn and did the same speed through the parking lot in a grocery store parking lot. And we both were like, "Whoa! Boy, I'm glad we weren't in that lane." God does what? He wants to say, "Look, do you see me? Do you know I'm here? That I'm with you, that I'm in you?" Deuteronomy chapter 8. There's this little thing that happens in our lives that none of us really like too much, and it's called a trial or a test. If you like trials and tests, then you are definitely deeply converted, and you don't need to be listening to this tonight. Because if you rejoice in every single one, you have become spiritual, and I want to talk to you and learn. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 1. All the commandments which I command you this day shall you observe to do, that you may live and multiply. Go and possess the land which the Lord swore unto your fathers. And you shall remember all the way which the Lord your God led you these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble you, to prove you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep His commandments or not. And He humbled you, and He suffered you to hunger, and fed you with manna, which you didn't know, neither did their fathers know, that He might make you know that a man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord does man live. So God tested him. They were tested in big things and little tiny things. And He was always with them. But much of the time, they couldn't see Him. And the warning is in verse 11. Here's the warning. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God in not keeping His commandments, His judgments, His statutes, which I command you this day. Lest when you are eaten and full, you've built good houses and dwelt therein, and when your herds and flocks multiply, your silver and your gold is multiplied, all you have is multiplied, your heart be lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt and the house of bondage. And he goes all the way down to verse 20. The warning is, don't take anything for granted. And the other warning is, don't look for the Red Sea and miss the manna. How many problems would be eliminated if we look for God every day in our lives in the little things? Well, we look to Him when we're sick and we're nigh unto death, and if He doesn't intervene, we're going to die, don't we? Or financially, when we lose everything, man, we're looking to Him. But then we get the money back, we get the health back, and we go right back to ourselves like we were before. Because we're human. We miss God's presence in our lives at times because we want God to be the way we think He should be. But the problem is, that may not be God. Oh, yes, it is. I know who God is. Maybe you don't. You think you do. And maybe He's saying, do you see me? I'm here. I'm here. Do you see me? Do you know I'm here? In preparing for the Feast of Tabernacles, there have been a lot of very important details that have to be taken care of. Communication is critical. Even with the electronic age we live in, it is very hard sometimes to coordinate things. God blesses us every year and helps us in so many ways. I could go on and on. But daily I go to Him and say, please, help us remember and see You as You are here. A good experience was today, setting all this up. Listening to all the, I call us worker bees, work together, and the various and you have to sit back and observe this, because we're all like this. When you've been in the church a long time, which we all have, we all know how things should be done. And I listen and watch how somebody has to back off and give in, and somebody has to take charge and lead, and you have to shift and move. And finally you get to the point like, I'm just tired enough of doing this. Let's just do it together, whatever it is. And you watch it start working together. Right? And ultimately somebody has to make a decision to say, no, I want to move down another foot. Oh, okay. But I don't want to do it, but I'll do it. And you watch this happen during the feast, and by the end of the feast, you have a family, if we're trying to see God, that says, there's God, there's God, there's God in each one of His children. Right? And Joe likes to get up at 5. I like to get up at 9. Right? So you got to, and you start realizing God is working individually with each one of us, but He's here. But we're all not going to be like me. We're all not going to be like Rich. Not that that would be bad for you. I'm going to speak for me. But And you start to see them and you realize part of the beauty is, and this is what's going to happen when we have the Feast of Tabernacles, ultimately the millennium. You're going to have all these people that don't think like you. Okay? My wife and I got a big dose of this in Colombia. When we realized that the Colombians, dear brethren, were not going to be on time for anything. They would be late for their own funeral. But you had the Americans come over like, you must start at 7:30. And they have a cow. Well, I'm not coming if you don't start on time. I said, there's no one here but you. Well, I'm on time. And after 8 years, we knocked 45 minutes off the hour and a half time of being late. People would say, look at your watch. Look what time it is. I said, I'm not wearing one. They'd say, where's your watch? I say, it doesn't do any good. Are you kidding me? You need to teach these people. So in the millennium, everybody's going to be German or everybody's going to be Colombian. You know? And so when we set this up today, I was watching this. It's beautiful. All the work that went, all the people, and thank you. But it was just interesting listening to people talk and work together. I can't work with him. Another guy says, I love working with him. That happened today. I don't like working with him. I can't work with him. You can't, it doesn't work well. And somebody else says, I love working with him. I thought, okay. You learn that in marriage. What are we going to do in the world tomorrow when God says, I am here, and a bunch of people say, no, you're not doing things right. You open with prayer instead of songs. Or whatever it is, right? What are we going to do? What are we going to do if the marriage supper doesn't start exactly at 6? That's when you eat. Right? This is not funny, but we had a wedding recently where a man came up to me and said, I can't believe how long it took to finally get to the meal part after the wedding. I said, well, what do you want me to do? Not go through the ceremony? He said, you don't have a wedding supper after 6:30. And I just wanted to laugh. I'm like, okay. You know, talk to the bride and groom and tell them they got to move it next time. So God's sitting here working with Israel. And with the feast, it's the same way. When we go through challenges and difficulties, do we look for God working with us and being there with us during them? And do we try to emulate our Father in heaven? Remember what Job said at the end of his experience? Now, toward the end of his experience, now I see you. In Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 5 and 6, we go where God placed His name. Have you ever thought about that in terms of Sabbath services? Remember, the Sabbath is the first day of the Lord mentioned in Leviticus 23. It's the first feast day. We search, we pray for a place to meet. Oh, but you can't meet in a house, Brad. Got to be a building. Got to be a nice building with a catered meal and nice, good furniture and carpet. You can't meet in a home ever. Right? You definitely can't meet in a Days Inn. And granted, some places I'm not sure I'd want to meet in again. But when a place opens up for God's people to meet, do you think that's just a coincidence? Let me tell you the story about this hall. And some of the folks that work here may be watching. So if you are, hi. They said they're going to come by and see us. So we needed a place to meet. We looked, and it was Mr. Eric. I asked him from Tennessee. I'm only 28 miles away. I figure he's closer. He calls me and says, I think it was you, right? I found this place. I reached out to him. We started to talk to him. They said, well, it's this much. And I went, oh. They said, unless you're a citizen or whatever of Orange Beach, which we're not. And I went in and prayed about it, called them back. They said, yeah, it's fine. We'll give it to you for that. And so here we are, and it's like, it's very, very reasonable for what we have. We may not have it next year. I don't take anything for granted. I don't. We may. but we may not. And so, Sabbath services, all the different things we've done, some are in a paradigm that you cannot ever meet in a pavilion at a park with 20 people. It's got, especially with other people around, while they'll see us with our Bibles. Well, it may get more dangerous as time goes on. But does God open and give us blessings? We become accustomed to traditions of men. Does God care for His children, you and me, by chance? Just throw them to Orton Beach. They can go over here and go there. Some of you that have been here with us for many years know this. You're excited the whole year after the last great day, aren't you, Jan? I can't wait to go back till next year. Hurry up already. I'm like, we just left. Yeah, but I want to come back. But you got to wait. But I don't want to wait. Right? Do we look forward to the holy days and the Sabbath every week? Like this is the people ask me, on your calendar, they said, I said, well, I got to see what I'm doing on the Sabbath, where I'm going to be. And they're like, do you always think about everything revolves around the Sabbath? I said, actually, I do. All the other days, man puts in there, but I don't say, well, my day starts on Monday, because it doesn't. It starts on Sunday for work, but because of my responsibility, my job, the Sabbath is my day, and I get to be with all these wonderful brethren. And they're like, I've never met anybody that, I said, and then I schedule around the holy days. So everything centers around that. Have you ever thought about doing that? Oh, I can't do that. It's not my job. It is your job. Do you look forward to the Sabbath every week? So I don't have to work. I can sleep the whole day. Maybe because you're exhausted. But do you look forward to the Sabbath? Do you look forward to the feast? I do. I look forward to Stephanie's meals all year long. I look forward to watching everybody work together to set this up. And today was unique because I'm injured. I had to sit and watch everybody. I couldn't do much. And that was tough. That'd be like Brad watching a bunch of people going rock climbing and kayaking fishing, and he couldn't do it. Right? He just sit and watch. That'd be tough, yeah. And so, without God's presence, and you see everything come together, without Him, it wouldn't be the feast. And it's the feast of the Lord. And so when we're all together like this, here and online and via webcast, and you see He is here in our midst, that Spirit of God, Galatians 2:20, I'm crucified with Christ, nevertheless we live. It's not us, it's Christ lives in us by the faith of the Son of God that gave Himself for us. Philippians 2:5, that mind, He is in us, He is here. It changes how the feast is kept and observed. And there's these significant and important events in the history of mankind and coming. But these days picture what we live for. This time together. The lessons for the world, yes, but lessons for us. They teach us to see God. And they teach us to see that God is here. The Jews have an understanding, the branches they weave and wave, that God is everywhere and most certainly present with them at the feast. How much more true for us? And not just at the feast. We need to be a people who look for God in His hand in our daily lives. Every year, I'm excited to keep the feast. It never gets boring. It never gets too tiring. Yes, I get tired, but the feast itself, being with everyone, is not tiring. It's not. And it's important. Don't worry about the things at home. Don't worry about things that you can't control. Because most of our lives we can't. Are we focused here where God during this time is keeping the feast and then looking forward to the future, which He is? I can only imagine God gets pretty excited when He says, here's another one, another one. We're close. We're getting closer. This is going to be real someday. Right? And when that trumpet is blown and He returns, it's going to blow Brad's shofar off the bridge, right? We'll see Him more clearly. We redirect our life to Him and thank Him that He's here to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Because someday, this whole world will follow, by example, what we're doing. Finally, let's turn to the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 22. Revelation chapter 22. Because the goal of this way of life, you know what it is? To see God face to face. Revelation 22, verse 1 to 5. And He showed me a pure river, the water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. In the midst of the street on either side of the river there was the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month. And the leaves of the trees were for the well-being of the nations. And there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God, the Lamb shall be in it, and His servants shall serve Him. They shall see His face, and His name shall be in their foreheads. And there shall be no night there, need no candle, neither light of the sun, for the Lord God gives them light, and they shall reign forever and ever. I can only ponder, meditate, muse, and think what that's going to be like. Because it isn't just a vision. It's a reality, and with a conviction that God gives us through the indwelling of His Spirit, we'll need no change. So do you wonder if God is with us? Don't wonder if. Know that He is. Our challenge is to see Him. And my friends, during these 8 days, the 7 days of the feast and the last great day, as we truly rejoice before God, pray that we can truly see Him, connect with Him, and in unity let Him live in us. Look at each person here as a child of God and break some of the paradigms that we carry of what we think everyone should be like, because we're like that. And see what God does as He lives in His children, and focus on the spiritual part of the feast, because it is God's feast. Not just the celebrating, not just the physical, but in letting Christ live in us, we are then spiritually fed and connected with Him. So be ready to be spiritually fed tomorrow, the first day of God's feast, as we worship together, where God is here. And may you have a blessed rest, sweet dreams, and we'll see you tomorrow.